having me on this panel. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you to Policy Circle also. So much of what Mary said completely resonates. And let me pick up from where she left and also start with some data. But let me start with actually my own data in some ways. My entering engineering class, we were 15 women out of 350. So you do the math, sub 5%. Today, that number is closer to 30%. Srinath, when you and I started thinking about, how many women on boards, 15 years ago, we were 3.5% women on Indian boards. Today, there's change in corporate India and global corporate, but also legislative support and regulatory support. We now have close to 20% women on boards. So I want to start with these two statistics to show that the needle has moved. In some ways, the slope of the curve is in the right direction. We are making progress. Question is, are we making enough progress? 50% of the world is female, more or less, right? So whether it's 49, 51, gender ratios being what they are. Ruth Bader Ginsburg very famously said, women should be everywhere decisions are being made. Because in the absence of involving 50% of our species, we are actually sort of under-leveraging the total talent potential of the human race. I would sort of put it out there. It's not about business, it's not about government, but really as a society and as a species, if we are not tapping into half our talent pool for the most part, or we are biasing ourselves in such a way that it is not fully effective, it is actually bad for all of us, whether it is in business or otherwise. Now let's go to the points that Mary made, and I completely agree, Mary. And it is such a paradox where we are now seeing much better, greater intake. So if you think about the total pipe, to some extent between government and society and social attitudes and policy, we have sort of addressed the intake problem. Girls going to school is a given. We still have, of course, extremely underprivileged segments, whether they are geographic segments or they are social segments where girls do not have access to education. That's still work in progress. But a lot of work has been done and we are seeing the outcomes, positive outcomes. I spoke about 20% women on board. So what happens in the middle? And it seems like we are seeing two divergent trends. One is our segments of society where for economic reasons, it is not a choice. Her income is critical to the family. So she's not working out of choice. She would prefer to not have to do two jobs, right? One at home and one at work. She has to work because her income is critical. But in those segments, which are highly educated, affluent, and with probably the largest, highest earning potential and highest degree of influence in the workplace, who should be getting into leadership roles, we are seeing a significant drop-off. We have seen a decline in female labor force participation, that Mary also referred to, and it's actually quite alarming. It's happening in rural India, it's happening in urban India as well. We see anecdotally in our circles, in our organizations. The other hat, I wear a couple of other hats. I sit on some large public company boards, including Tata and Piramal, and some very, very fine organizations. I'm also president of Bombay Chamber. And it's a discussion we have constantly in the chamber. How do we get this trend that we are seeing of declining women in our teams and in our organizations? What can we do to fix that? Srinath, you mentioned startup world. We're actually seeing a positive trend. More women are going into entrepreneurship, at least of this segment. The educated, high achieving segment, they're going into entrepreneurship. Sometimes they're dropping out, quote unquote, of the corporate workplace. They're saying, I don't want to deal with that. I want to work on my own terms. I'll start. And capital is now more available. There is still very strong bias. There are various studies that show that globally, just about 3.5% to 5%, depending on which study you look at, of total venture capital goes to women-founded businesses. So yes, there's a lot of work to be done, but we are seeing positive trajectory here. I think the question in my mind that has to be addressed. One is, what is the state and society doing? Are we doing enough as government and policy, as well as society, to support our girls to participate more in workplace, not in education? Second is, are we doing enough as families in how we raise not our girls, but our boys? Because how will we ever get to equitable workplaces if you don't have equitable home places? So if the burden and responsibility of domestic work, which, as we all know, is largely unpaid and hence largely unrecognized. If that is really, I think, and some of those attitudes are getting stronger actually. And it's the affluence paradox. As society is becoming more affluent, the income is not required. So she is then expected to really be the world's best mother, wife, daughter-in-law, daughter, all of that. And now what is the definition of that, right? The best. So I think some of that work still needs to be done. State policies, for the most part, state does their bit. I acknowledge, Mary, what you said around sort of violence and how can, particularly in the manufacturing and agricultural sector, where so many more women are working, whether they're employed or casual workers, there's work to be done on safety and social attitudes that promote safety. But at the same time, I think even in urban and semi-urban areas, it really does come down to social attitudes, and those originate out of the family. Because ultimately, whether it is organizations, government or business or education, or individuals, they all exist in the context of society. So it is our social attitudes and familial attitudes. Familial attitudes are now not just permitting, but encouraging their girls and women to be educated, but not encouraging their married women to expect sharing of domestic responsibility. I think there's such a switch you see when you see young women coming into the workforce. They're bright, they're educated, they're ambitious, they want to do it all. Then they get married, then they have children, and something switches. So I'm going to pause there. Work to be done in educating our boys, not just our girls.